I was writing another check for my daughter's wedding expenses when something nagged at me about her fiancé, Marcus. Something seemed unusual.
Call it grandmother's intuition, but the way he avoided eye contact when discussing his family business in Alabama felt wrong. So I hired a private investigator, using the same money I'd budgeted for wedding flowers. What she found 3 days before the ceremony made my blood run cold. Marcus already had a wife, and she was 8 months pregnant with his second child. My daughter called me paranoid when I tried to warn her, so I decided to let the truth speak for itself at the altar. The humid New Orleans air clung to my skin as I sat on the wrought iron balcony of my shotgun house in the Treme, watching the sun set over the French Quarter. In my lap lay a manila envelope that contained documents that would shatter my daughter's world, but potentially save her life. The private investigator had been thorough. Marriage certificate, birth certificate of Marcus's first child, hospital records showing Sarah Louise Thompson was due to deliver his second child in 3 weeks. Emma's wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at St. Louis Cathedral, with the reception at the Roosevelt Hotel. The total cost had climbed to $152,847, every penny coming from my retirement savings and the small inheritance I'd received when my own mother passed last year. I told myself it was worth it to see Emma happy, to give her the fairy tale wedding she'd dreamed of since she was little. But fairy tales, I was learning, sometimes had wolves disguised as princes. It had started with small inconsistencies. Marcus claimed his family owned a construction business in Mobile, Alabama, but when I tried to look it up online, nothing appeared. He said his parents were traveling internationally and couldn't attend the engagement party, but his stories about where they were visiting kept changing. When I'd suggested flying to Alabama to meet them before the wedding, he'd become evasive, claiming they were very private people who didn't like unexpected visitors. The final red flag had been his phone behavior. Marcus was glued to his device, but he never answered calls when Emma was around. He'd step outside, lower his voice, and return with vague explanations about work emergencies or family business. For a man who claimed to be deeply in love and planning his future, he seemed to have an awful lot of secrets.
That's when I'd made the decision that would either save my daughter or destroy our relationship forever. I'd hired Denise Williams, a private investigator recommended by my church friend who'd used her services during her own divorce. Denise was a sharp-eyed black woman in her 50s who'd spent 20 years as a police detective before going private. If anyone could uncover the truth about Marcus, it would be her. Mrs. Johnson, Denise had said when she called me Tuesday morning, her voice heavy with the weight of bad news, "We need to meet, and you're going to want to sit down for this conversation." We'd met at a small cafe in the Garden District, away from the French Quarter where Emma and Marcus spent most of their time. Denise had spread the documents across the table between us like a deck of cards revealing a losing hand. Marcus David Thompson, she'd begun, pointing to a marriage certificate dated 3 years prior, is legally married to Sarah Louise Thompson, née Williams of Mobile, Alabama. They have a 2-year-old son named Marcus Jr., and she's currently 8 months pregnant with their second child. The coffee in my mouth had turned bitter as the implications sank in. Are you saying he's planning to commit bigamy? That's exactly what I'm saying. He's been living a double life, maintaining a home and family in Alabama while courting your daughter here in New Orleans. According to my research, he travels back and forth frequently, telling his wife he's working construction jobs in Louisiana. I'd stared at the photographs Denise had taken. Marcus pushing a stroller through a Mobile shopping center, his arm around a beautiful pregnant woman. Marcus at what appeared to be a child's birthday party, clearly playing the role of devoted father and husband. Does Emma know anything about this? Denise had asked gently. Nothing. She thinks he's a successful businessman who fell in love with her at first sight. She's been planning this wedding for 8 months, talking about the children they'll have, the life they'll build together. My voice had cracked as the magnitude of the deception hit me. She's been living in a complete fantasy. Have you tried telling her? Have you tried telling her? That question had haunted me for the past 3 days, because I had tried. The moment I'd gotten home from meeting with Denise, I'd called Emma to my house under the pretense of discussing final wedding details. I'd sat her down in my living room, The same room where I taught her to braid hair, helped her with homework, and listened to her dreams about her future. "Baby," I'd said carefully, "I need to talk to you about Marcus. I've discovered some things that—" "Mama, please," Emma had interrupted, her voice sharp with irritation. "If this is another one of your lectures about how I'm moving too fast or how I don't know him well enough, I don't want to hear it. I'm 28 years old. I know what I'm doing." "Emma, listen to me. Marcus is already married. He has a wife and child in Alabama with another baby on the way." The silence that had followed was deafening. Emma had stared at me for a long moment, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. "That's ridiculous," she'd said flatly. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Marcus loves me. We're getting married in 4 days." I'd tried to show her the documents, but she'd pushed them away without looking. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Mama, but I'm not falling for it. Are you so determined to control my life that you'd make up lies about the man I love?" "Emma, please, just look at the marriage certificate." "No!" She stood up abruptly, her eyes blazing. "I know what this is about. You can't stand that I'm happy. You can't stand that I found someone who wants to take care of me, someone who loves me enough to marry me. You've been alone for so long that you've forgotten what love looks like." Her words had cut deeper than any physical blow. My husband, Emma's father, had died in a car accident when she was 12. I'd raised her alone, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat, sacrificing my own chances at companionship to focus entirely on her future. To hear her suggest that my concerns came from bitterness rather than love was devastating. "This isn't about me being alone," I'd said quietly. "This is about protecting you from a man who's lying to you about the most fundamental aspect of his identity." "Get out," Emma had said, her voice cold and final. "Get out of my house and don't contact me again unless you're ready to apologize for these horrible accusations."
She'd been staying at Marcus's apartment since their engagement, but legally she was still living in the small house I'd helped her buy 2 years earlier. Being kicked out of a home I'd helped finance by a daughter who refused to listen to reason had been almost as painful as the truth itself. I'd tried calling her multiple times over the next 2 days, but she'd sent every call straight to voicemail. I'd sent text messages with photos of the documents, but she'd blocked my number. I'd even driven to Marcus's apartment, but the doorman had been instructed not to let me up. Meanwhile, wedding preparations continued around me like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The florist called to confirm delivery times. The caterer wanted final head counts. The photographer needed to discuss the family photo schedule. Each conversation was a reminder that in less than 48 hours, my daughter was going to commit herself to a man who was already committed to someone else. That's when I'd made the decision that would either save Emma or cost me my relationship with her forever. I'd called Denise back Wednesday evening. "I need you to do something else for me," I'd said. "I need you to contact Sarah Thompson." "Mrs. Johnson, are you sure about this? Once we involve the legal wife, there's no going back. This situation is going to explode, and the fallout is going to be significant. My daughter is about to unknowingly become an accessory to bigamy. If she goes through with this marriage, she could face legal consequences, not to mention the emotional devastation when the truth eventually comes out. And it will come out. Men like Marcus don't maintain double lives forever." Denise had been quiet for a moment. "What exactly do you want me to tell Mrs. Thompson?" "The truth. That her husband is planning to marry another woman this Saturday in New Orleans. Give her the time, the location, and let her decide what she wants to do with that information. And if she decides to show up..." I'd looked around my empty house, at the framed photos of Emma's childhood, at the life we'd built together that was about to be torn apart regardless of what I did. Then at least my daughter will learn the truth before she makes the biggest mistake of her life. Thursday had passed in a haze of wedding-related phone calls and last-minute arrangements. Emma still wasn't speaking to me, but the vendors assumed I was still the mother of the bride, still responsible for coordinating details and making decisions. I'd played the role, confirming transportation schedules and finalizing seating charts,
all while knowing that everything was about to fall apart. Friday morning, Denise had called with an update that made my stomach churn with anticipation and dread. "I spoke with Sarah Thompson," she'd said without preamble. Well, she's devastated, as you can imagine, but she's also furious. Apparently, Marcus told her he was working on a big construction project in Louisiana that required him to stay away for weeks at a time. She had no idea he was maintaining a relationship, let alone planning a wedding. What is she going to do? "She's driving down from Mobile tonight. She'll be in New Orleans tomorrow morning, and she wants to attend the wedding." The words had hit me like a physical blow. Attend the wedding? Her exact words were, "I want to see the look on that lying bastard's face when I walk into that church." Mrs. Johnson, this woman is 8 months pregnant and furious. Tomorrow is going to be explosive. I'd spent Friday night pacing my house, alternating between relief that the truth would finally come out and terror about the emotional destruction that was about to rain down on everyone involved. Emma was going to be humiliated in front of 200 guests. The wedding I'd spent my life savings on was going to become a scandal that would be talked about for years. And I was going to be the mother who'd orchestrated it all. But every time I considered backing out, calling Denise and telling her to stop Sarah from coming, I thought about the alternative. Emma married to a bigamist, potentially charged as an accessory to his crime. Her entire future built on a foundation of lies that would eventually crumble. Whatever pain she experienced tomorrow would be nothing compared to the devastation she'd face when the truth inevitably emerged months or years down the line. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect New Orleans day that made the city feel magical. I dressed carefully in the navy blue dress I'd bought for the occasion, the one Emma had helped me pick out, back when we were still talking, back when she still trusted my judgment. The cathedral was stunning, decorated with white roses and magnolias, the soft light filtering through stained glass windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. Guests began arriving at 1:30 for the 2 o'clock ceremony, elegant in their wedding attire, chatting quietly in the pews as they waited for the bride and groom to appear. I'd taken my seat in the third row, close enough to see everything that was about to unfold, but far enough back to avoid being immediately associated with whatever chaos was coming. Around me, friends and family members smiled and whispered about how beautiful Emma was going to look, how lucky she was to have found such a wonderful man, how perfect the day was turning out to be. At 1:50, Marcus had appeared at the altar with his best man, both of them handsome in their black tuxedos. Marcus had looked confident and relaxed, smiling at guests, checking his watch, playing the role of the nervous but excited groom to perfection. Looking at him, it was hard to believe that this charming, well-dressed man was capable of such elaborate deception. At 1:55, the wedding party had begun their procession down the aisle. Emma's bridesmaids, beautiful in their deep purple dresses, had glided gracefully toward the altar, their faces glowing with happiness for their friend. And then, at exactly 2 o'clock, 2 things had happened simultaneously. The organist had begun playing "Here Comes the Bride," signaling Emma's entrance at the back of the cathedral. And Sarah Louise Thompson had walked through the main doors. She was beautiful, even 8 months pregnant, and clearly exhausted from her drive from Alabama. She wore a simple black dress that accentuated her condition, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her face set in an expression of grim determination. She didn't rush or make a scene. She simply walked slowly down the side aisle and took a seat in an empty pew about halfway up, directly in Marcus's line of sight. The effect was immediate and devastating. Marcus had gone pale, his confident smile faltering as his eyes locked onto his pregnant wife. His best man had noticed the change immediately,
following Marcus's gaze to see what had caused such a dramatic reaction. But Emma, radiant in her white gown and completely focused on her walk down the aisle, had noticed nothing. She'd moved gracefully toward the altar, her face glowing with joy, completely unaware that her fairy tale was about to become a nightmare.
The moment she'd reached the altar and turned to face Marcus, she'd seen his expression and known something was wrong. His face was ashen, his hands trembling slightly as he stared past her toward the congregation. "Marcus," she'd whispered, concern creeping into her voice. "What's wrong?" That's when Sarah had stood up. "Marcus David Thompson," she'd called out, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. "Would you like to explain to everyone here why you're about to commit bigamy?" The silence that had followed was absolute. 200 guests had turned in their seats to stare at the pregnant woman who just accused the groom of being married. Emma had spun around, her eyes wide with confusion and growing horror. "Who is that?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Marcus, who is that woman?" Marcus had opened his mouth, but no words had come out. He'd stood frozen at the altar, his worst nightmare playing out in front of everyone he'd been trying to deceive. Sarah had begun walking toward the altar, moving slowly but purposefully, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "My name is Sarah Thompson," she'd announced to the stunned congregation. "I'm Marcus's wife. We've been married for 3 years, and I'm 8 months pregnant with our second child." Emma had staggered backward as if she'd been physically struck. "That's not possible," she'd gasped. "Marcus, tell her that's not possible." But Marcus had said nothing. He'd stood there in his expensive tuxedo, exposed and caught, with nowhere to run and no way to explain away the pregnant woman calling him her husband. "You bastard," Emma had whispered, and then louder, "You lying, cheating bastard!" The cathedral had erupted in chaos. Guests had begun talking loudly, some standing to get a better view, others pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. The wedding party had stood frozen in shock, unsure whether to stay or flee. Emma had turned toward the congregation, her eyes searching until they'd found me. The look on her face when our eyes met was something I'd remember for the rest of my life. A mixture of betrayal, humiliation, and dawning understanding. She'd known. In that moment, she had realized that I'd been telling the truth all along. "You knew," she'd said, her voice carrying over the chaos. "You knew about this." I'd stood up slowly, my heart breaking for my daughter, even as I felt relief that the truth was finally out. "I tried to tell you, baby. I tried to warn you." Emma had stared at me for a long moment, tears streaming down her face, her wedding dress suddenly looking like a costume from a play that had gone horribly wrong. Then she'd gathered up her skirts and ran down the aisle, pushing past guests and fleeing the cathedral. Marcus had finally found his voice. "Sarah, what are you doing here? This isn't what it looks like." "Isn't what it looks like?" Sarah had laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the cathedral walls. "It looks like you were about to marry another woman while I'm home in Alabama, 8 months pregnant with your child, wondering why my husband is never around." She'd turned to address the congregation. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to interrupt your wedding, but I thought you should know that the groom is already married to me. And before you ask, yes, I have the marriage certificate in my purse if anyone would like to see it." The chaos had continued for another 10 minutes before the priest had finally managed to clear the cathedral. Marcus had disappeared sometime during the confusion, presumably to avoid any confrontation with law enforcement. The wedding party had scattered, the guests had filed out in shocked whispers, and I'd been left standing in the empty cathedral with Sarah Thompson. "Mrs. Johnson?" she'd asked, approaching me cautiously. "Denise Williams told me you were the one who hired her to investigate Marcus." I'd nodded, not trusting my voice. "Thank you," she'd said simply. "I know this was hard for you, but you saved your daughter from making a terrible mistake, and you saved me from wondering for the rest of my life why my husband kept disappearing."
We'd stood together in the devastated beauty of the cathedral, 2 women who'd been betrayed by the same man, united in our determination to protect the people we loved. The aftermath had been as difficult as I had expected. Emma had refused to see me for 2 weeks, staying with friends and ignoring my calls. The wedding vendors had been understanding about the cancellation, given the circumstances, though I'd still lost significant deposits.
The story had spread through our community like wildfire, making Emma the subject of gossip and sympathy in equal measure. But eventually, she'd come home. "I'm sorry, Mama," she'd said when she'd finally knocked on my door, her eyes red from crying but clear for the first time in months. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. I'm sorry I accused you of lying. I'm sorry I chose him over you." "You don't need to apologize for believing in love," I told her, holding her tight. "You just need to learn that real love doesn't require you to ignore your instincts or dismiss the people who care about you." Emma had nodded against my shoulder. "How did you know? What made you suspicious enough to hire a private investigator?" "A mother's intuition," I had said, "and the fact that a man who truly loves you doesn't hide parts of his life from you. Love should make you feel more secure, not less. It should answer questions, not create them." We'd spent that evening going through all the wedding gifts that had been returned, deciding which ones to donate and which ones to keep for whenever Emma was ready to try love again, this time with someone who deserved her. Sarah Thompson had filed for divorce and moved back to New Orleans to be closer to her family during her final month of pregnancy. Marcus had been charged with bigamy and fraud, though he'd plea bargained down to lesser charges in exchange for paying child support and staying away from both Sarah and Emma. Emma had started therapy to work through the betrayal and to understand how she'd missed so many red flags. She'd also started dating again, but more carefully this time, asking questions and trusting her instincts, rather than getting swept away by charm and promises. 6 months later, we'd been able to laugh about some aspects of the disaster. "At least I looked amazing in the dress," Emma had said while we'd been looking through the wedding photos the photographer had taken before everything fell apart. I agreed. "You looked beautiful, and you're going to look even more beautiful when you marry someone who deserves you." "Next time," Emma had said, "I'm eloping. Next time, I'm running a background check first." We'd both laughed, but we'd both meant it. The experience had taught us both valuable lessons about trust, love, and the importance of listening to the people who care about you. It had also taught me that sometimes being a good mother means being willing to be the villain in your child's story, at least temporarily, in order to save them from a much worse fate. Looking back, I had no regrets about hiring Denise Williams or orchestrating Marcus's exposure at the Cathedral. The humiliation Emma had experienced was temporary. The devastation of discovering his bigamy after years of marriage would have been permanent. Sometimes love means protecting the people you care about from their own poor judgment. Sometimes it means being willing to be hated in order to prevent something worse from happening. And sometimes, just sometimes, it means ruining a wedding in order to save a life. Emma never thanked me for what I'd done, not directly. But a year later, when she'd started dating a good man who introduced her to his family on their third date, and who answered his phone regardless of who was around, she'd looked at me and smiled. "You were right, Mama," she'd said quietly. "Real love doesn't require secrets." That was thanks enough. The money I'd spent on the wedding that never happened was gone forever, but the daughter I'd saved was priceless. And the next time Emma got married, to a man who loved her enough to be honest with her, I'd pay for that wedding too. Gladly. After all, every mother wants to see her daughter have a fairy tale wedding. She just wants to make sure the prince is real.